Okay. All right. So this is where we ended up yesterday. Yes. Do what? Just run right up there. So this is where we ended up yesterday, looking at Assyria and what that Assyrian Empire looked like, why it was successful, a couple other of the important things about it, and how it collapsed. So we're going to move on to the Persian Empire next. And here, again, is a difficult thing about learning history the way that we learn history, where you learn it in little chunks. It's important to understand that all of this stuff is happening at the same time. So when we make the Assyrian Empire collapse, it doesn't just mean it collapsed and went away. It means it ceased to be the most powerful part of that empire in the area of Mesopotamia. It's still there. They're still Assyrians. They still have some sense of power. But all of these empires are happening in and around the same time period. Just some are at different strengths than others, especially when we get to Egypt, because we're going to have all these different old Egypt, middle, new. They all are still there. And when we say that it collapses, it just ceases to be powerful. It doesn't mean that it's wiped off the face of the earth. So that's the hard part. Again, I think as students. Ty, are you finishing a bell question? Thank you. All right. So now we're going to look at Persia. So when the Assyrians collapse, and if it helps you to think of power in like a barrel, or when the barrel's full of that power, one person has it. But if that barrel starts to drop in its water, someone else takes over. And that's what happens. Power is an entity that can be measured, and you can't divide it up. You either have it all or you don't have any. And so that's what the Persian Empire, when the Assyrian Empire collapses, Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon makes his way straight into Western Asia. Those of you that really paid attention to that map when you were doing that and actually paying attention to where you were putting things, and hopefully you remember, Babylon was right in the middle, in between of the Tigris and Euphrates River. Babylon is the most important city in that area. And again, those of you that are people of faith, this is probably a name that you have heard often, especially if you have or attend Sunday school or Vacation Bible School. I pronounce it like my Southern Granny Baptist church that I went to. I don't even know. I hear other people say it. It takes me a while to think about who they're talking about. But he obviously is a real person, and he is a king. And he is a very powerful king, but he also rules Babylon and this empire with a very strong, firm hand. It becomes one of the greatest ancient cities in the world. And it is part of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which again is a real thing for those of you that have heard that in other places. So Babylon is going to be conquered by Persia in 539 BCE by the Babylon's going to be conquered in 539 by the Persians. So the Persians are going to take over. And Persia is modern day Iran. So any of you watch TV shows? I love reality TV shows. It makes me feel like an awesome person when I watch all these people do such horrible things. My favorite when I was a mom was Toddlers and Tiaras, because I would tell my children, look at what those moms are doing. I'm awesome. I don't do that to you. But it's modern day Iran. And so there is one of my favorite shows about Persian people. And they call themselves Persians because that's what they are. That's why rugs are called Persian rugs. They're from Iran. So Persians were a nomadic Indo-European people living in what is today southwest Iran. And the leader of this first powerful group of Persia is named Cyrus. And he creates this gigantic, powerful Persian empire. And again, those of you that recall that map that we drew, that giant empire that you had to outline, which was Persia. It starts in Iran and goes all the way up to India. And Cyrus is going to rule that from 559 to 530 BCE. He's going to capture Babylon. So under Nebuchadnezzar had persecuted Jews, thrown Jews out. And when Cyrus returns to Babylon and captures Babylon, he allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem. He treats them with respect, with restraint. And this will be what we will look at in this next slide, where you got to write a lot of stuff. It is important when we talk about people being named the Great. Cyrus was, during his time, Cyrus the Great. He was called that during his time. So other people that you may know as the Great, like Catherine the Great or Peter the Great, they were not called that during their time period. That's something that history assigned to them later as they start to look at the legacy that they left behind. Cyrus is called that while he was alive. And so that, again, adds to his greatness. And if you look at what the first three things that make him great, it's nothing to do with military power. It's nothing to do with gaining wealth. It has nothing to do with destruction of other civilizations. It's really some of the kindest, most compassionate things that make people great. And the first one is wisdom. He was very smart, and he used that to his advantage. He was very compassionate in his conquest. So rather than what many other civilizations did when they conquered other nations, enslave people, destroy, pick out the strong and destroy them, he was compassionate. And what does that compassion look like? It looks like, all I want from you is your stuff. You can keep your gods, you can keep your wives, you can keep your children, you can pray the way that you want to pray. That is compassion. And then mercy. I think that most of us can understand mercy. He had real honest respect for other civilizations, so much so that sometimes he would incorporate new gods into the Persian religion to show honor and respect for other civilizations. And then he incorporated other civilizations' technology and advancement, and recognizing that while I might be conquering you, you guys might have stuff that's better than what we have. And that giant list is something that we don't see very often when we talk about leaders in world history. We certainly don't spend a lot of time speaking about wisdom and compassion and respect, which I hope you can see why Cyrus was considered great in his time period. He was able to build this gigantic empire because he doesn't have a lot of enemies. The Persian Empire isn't going to have a lot of enemies. And the reason being is because of the way Cyrus is going to rule. Sebastian, can you close your laptop for me? Thanks. Now, here's always the problem when we have these awesome, great rulers. His sons grow up. You think the sons are going to be as awesome and great? No. That's always a problem. When you have someone that you are following that's called the great, it's really hard, right? It's very hard to live up to that. His first son is going to be able to do that. And Cyrus's son Darius is going to do this. And then mostly it's because Cyrus works so hard, Darius is able to come up with this. So his son Darius extends the empire into India and Europe and created the largest empire the world had known. To that point, right? It's going to be surpassed by the Romans, and then the Romans are going to be surpassed by the British. But to date, it is the largest empire. Darius strengthens the Persian government by dividing it into 20 provinces. And so this begins this idea of how do you govern something that large? Because it's really hard to govern a wide area. And so he creates this organization. And even though we're calling it provinces, it could be called states or counties or any kind of unit that makes sense to you. And the satrap can be anything from a governor to a mayor. Just making sure that you understand that he takes the big empire, divides it into 20, and in each one of those spots, he picks a ruler. And it is the job of the satrap to collect taxes. That's the most important thing. The most important thing for any nation is the collection of taxes. Always, always, always. People get away with lots and lots of things, but they don't get away with not paying their taxes. Al Capone does not go to jail because he kills lots of people. Al Capone goes to jail because he didn't pay his taxes. They handle legal matters and underline, recruit soldiers. When you have an empire that large, you again need soldiers. And remember what we said about an empire. An empire means everybody in this place is not Persian. So I have to rule, and this is what makes these leaders so great. I have to rule this great place with people who aren't Persian. So I somehow have to make them feel part of the empire. I have to recognize their language. I have to recognize their customs. And one of the ways I can do that is create this big, giant Persian army that allows other people to participate in this army. The United States does that. In the United States, we have people from Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Ricans are citizens. People from the Philippines can be part of military as a way of embracing the old parts of our empire, the United States. Persians established communication systems using horses and regular post. And this was our royal road that you may or may not have drawn on your map, because this new book that we have, which is not really new. Persian Empire owed its power to its military. And again, holding on to an empire requires a strong military. It requires a strong military, especially on your outer limits. That's the parts that are going to collapse first. That's the part of the big cheese that the outside is going to start to nibble on, is the outside limits. People living out there wonder, am I that important? Does the Persian Empire care about what's happening to me out here? So that's where we're going to need that military power. And the military had a standing army from the entire empire. And that's just what I said. What's a standing army? A standing army is really important when we think about having strength. A standing army means I have an army every day. It's not a militia. It's not a guard. It's not a call up. I have an army that's available to me every single day of the week. In peacetime, I still pay. In war, I have a very readily available army that's well trained. So why doesn't everybody do that? Because it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money. So I have an entire army that I have to feed and clothe and house and pay a salary to, whether they're fighting or not. And that requires an extensive, and we're talking about the time period, treasure box. I got to have something that goes in that treasure box. That's why a couple of slides ago, collecting taxes is so important. If I am Cyrus, I don't have a job, right? I don't get a paycheck. The only way we get money is from taxes. The United States government, the only way it pays the Department of Defense is by collecting our taxes. And the largest part of our taxes go to pay for the Department of Defense. Everything. And all of those expenses are paid by tax dollars. So I've mentioned 100 times, and I'll mention it a way 100 more times. My dad was active duty Air Force my whole entire life that I live with my family, and we moved everywhere. Every time we moved, the United States government paid for our move. Shipped a car across the Atlantic Ocean when my dad was stationed in Germany, paid for by the United States government. All of my teachers were Department of Defense teachers, paid for by the United States government. Every house I lived in, we paid no rent. We didn't pay electric bill. We didn't pay a light bill. We didn't pay a water bill. Our house was paid for by the Department of Defense. And that's why you have to have a big, giant treasure box for that, to pay all of those expenses. Those men are going to train. They're going to drill. They need weapons. They need food. They need uniforms. All of those things are important. And at the core of this powerful Persian army is an elite group called the Immortals. Now, check mark first, they are not really immortal. Think SEALs, Rangers, that kind of thing. This is an elite training group that were picked as a part that would, first and foremost, protect Cyrus. The Immortals earned their name because anyone who was killed was instantly, do you guys not have this? instantly replaced, or do I not have you write anything on it? And the immortals made up 10,000 cavalry, 10,000 infantry. So they were immortal for a couple of reasons. If you were fighting against them, they look like you could never kill them. And if anyone took and paid close attention to the pictures yesterday, and looked that all of those men kind of sort of looked alike, that was on purpose. It's a psychological disadvantage when you're fighting a group of people and they all look the same and you're trying to kill them all, and you hit one target and up pops someone that looks exactly the same. You notice they all had beards, they were all dressed alike. That's one of the psychological disadvantages when you're fighting a large group, is you feel like maybe you're winning because you're killing people, but as soon as you knock them down, another one comes back up. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Remember that tension of that whack-a-mole thing, trying to get them all down? Kind of like, sadly, a bad analogy, but with humans, right? You knock one down and another one comes back up. Psychologically, that is a difficult task to overcome when you think that you're killing people, but they still keep popping up. So that's how Persian held on to their gigantic empire. One of the things that you will be asked a lot about Persia is their economy, and it is because these are the people that give us coins. So far with all of the analogies I've done with our class, like I'm going to give you a goat and you're going to give me a bushel of corn, we've been bartering, right? We haven't been exchanging money. We've been bartering. I'm going to give you something and you're going to give me something of different value. Darius says we need to use coins because not everyone has something of value that they need to exchange, and not everyone is willing to wait for that exchange. Remember, one of the exchanges I did often was, you give me a goat now and I'll give you wheat later. Not everybody wants a deal like that. And so Darius is going to set up and encourage the use of coins. He's also going to set up, and this is really important, a common system of weights and measures. So why is that important? Any of you ever pumped gas before? Do any of you really know how much gas you put in that car? You don't. We trust that the Indiana Department of Weights and Measures, that comes around every now and then and puts those little clear stickers. Next time you're pumping gas, look for the sticker. There should be a sticker somewhere on that gas, visible, Indiana Department of Weights and Measures, and it will tell you the date that they go. It's someone's job in Indiana to randomly go around gas stations with an open container and pump a gallon of gas and make sure it measures to a gallon. So it is, because the Department of Weights and Measures of Indiana says so. But you can see why that would be a problem if you didn't know. If you didn't really know that what you were getting was a bushel. And I always use a bushel because that's what my granny always referred to as a bushel basket. Never really knew when I was a kid that a bushel is an actual weight, just like a quart, a gallon. So what Darius says, if we're going to use weights and measurements, if a yard of fabric is a yard of fabric, it needs to be a yard of fabric across the Persian Empire. So he sets up this economy that's built on trust, that we trust each other, that when you say it's a yard of fabric, it's a yard of fabric. Taxes based on resources and wealth. And then this was the one that I was talking about when we first started talking about the mind maps, is roads. Lots and lots of roads. And roads do two things. They unify your empire because people can travel and move. They allow for communication and connection. And then they also bring about the exchange of ideas and culture, that people can move along these roads and exchange things, more importantly than just resources. You exchange ideas, you exchange culture. All right, any questions about that? This slide has lots of test questions on it, lots of them, because of the common weights and measures, coins, roads build unity. That is a really important part of this whole entire chapter is most important on that. So what causes the downfall of the Persian Empire? Darius dies, and the Persian Empire begins to decline and collapse. And this happens, and here's the important part. I'm going to scoot out here to the middle so I can see all of you. I hate being behind my desk. So here's the important part about the study of world history. The study of world history is important because of the rise of empires and the collapse. Why did empires rise? We have lots of different reasons why empires rise. Almost all of them have to do with some kind of strong military, but all of them collapse for the same exact reason. They all collapse for the same exact reason, which makes it pretty awesome for a world history student when we talk about them, because it's going to be the same regardless of who we talk for. And the first one is the king starts to isolate themselves. And now I'll move over because I'm in front. The king starts to isolate himself. So here's what happens with empires. We have one guy that starts it that works really, really hard. That would be Cyrus. He works really hard to get this empire. His son has watched how hard his dad has worked to get this thing. And Darius says, I'm not going to be the one to mess this up. And Darius does it and takes it even further. But what happens with Darius's son is they've always had wealth. They've always been part of this empire. And so they don't feel as connected. And so the kings will become isolated. I remove myself from you. I won't go out amongst you and associate with the people of my empire. And now I want more stuff, right? If my grandpa had a carriage that was pulled by 6 white horses, and my dad had a carriage that was pulled by 10 white horses, then I want 3 carriages pulled by 10 horses. So everything becomes a one-upment to say, I need more stuff. I need more stuff. And the only way to get more stuff is you have to tax your people. And then you start taxing people to get your stuff. But you're not ingratiating yourself out to the people, right? So when the state of Indiana wants to raise my taxes and they tell me I'm going to raise your taxes because we're going to build better roads or we're going to build a new school in Sullivan that has a swimming pool, I'll pay taxes for that. I'll definitely pay taxes if you're going to build a swimming pool in this school, because I think, even though I cannot swim, I think swimming is an awesome athletic builder. It's easy on muscles and joints, and you don't get concussions and you don't get hurt and you don't fly into people, and it's a lot harder to get hurt swimming laps than it is other. So I would gladly have my taxes raised for that. If the city or the county, I live in the county, if the county says, hey, we've run out of deputies, we don't have enough deputies, we need to increase our deputy force, but we have to increase taxes, I would vote for that as well. Yes, I have an immediate understanding of what my needs were going to go for. But if the governor said to me, we need to increase your taxes because I want to build a better house that I'm going to live in, no, I don't want to do that. You shouldn't be living in a better house than what you have already. Does that make sense? So when people are paying their taxes and they understand they're getting a service back for that, most people are willing to pay. But if their taxes are going to buy someone a carriage or a new jewel or more furs to lie on your bed at night, no thank you. I'm not going to work that hard for you. Then we also have to remember that we are not at a point where people are married to one person. Most men have many wives. It is the job of a king to have a lot of sons. And nor does the son that's the oldest son get to automatically be the king. It's kind of a nice thing for Darius because he gets to look at all these sons and he really gets to pick the one that would be the best king. The problem is these sons have moms. And all of these moms, who are the wives of the king, all they have to do all day is to promote their sons. And if you look, they assassinate each other so that they can become the king. Most often those assassinations are prodded on by their moms, because if I am the mom of a king, that elevates me out of this group of women kind of thing that we have going on. So that's the downfall of the Persian Empire. Every one of these things, these top 3 things, isolated, taxes, and struggles over the throne, are going to be the same for every empire that we study. Every single one of them. So again, I have to always laugh as a history teacher that we learn history so it doesn't repeat. We learn history so that we can follow the pattern that it repeats over and over and over again. It is a repetitive type of history. It's awesome for you as history students because now you can predict the downfall of every empire that we're going to study. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, so now we're going to do the mind map just like we did for the Sumerians, for the Persians. And this is your assignment for tomorrow. So we still have quite a bit of time. I'm still trying to work my way through. If you get this thing done well before then, you may turn it in. Drew, I got excited because I thought that was a Carolina blue. Then I gotta look down and see the old man city. So should you need that PowerPoint, it is again linked today so that you know where everything goes. Again, you should try to keep these things in the same spot. Again, you're creating a cheat sheet that you'll get to use on the test. You're welcome. Yes.
I think you should get
Did I get everybody?
Is this where we trace like the ones or where we
Do what?
is this where like we trace it?
Yes, it's the same one that we did with Samara.
Oh, so it is like
Yeah, and it's on there. You need to look at it. Yep. It's the same mind map that we did for the Samara.
as soon as I said it like on
You should do here. Oh, I gotta stop this.